Welcome to the 2023 CompTIA A+ hardware practice test. This test has 20 questions with explained answers that will help you for this section of the test. Before we get started, don't forget to zap that like button to see more videos like this. Now here's your CompTIA instructor to walk you through these questions.
Question 1. What is the most common type of memory upgraded in a PC to increase the number of programs and applications that can be run simultaneously? A. CMOS, B. Flash, C. ROM, D. RAM. The correct answer is D. RAM. All applications and programs must be loaded into RAM to access them. This makes RAM a prime target for upgrades to increase the number or size of items it can hold. The more RAM that is available typically provides for better performance. Question 2. Where is the BIOS stored on a standard PC? A. RAM, B. HDD, C. SSD, D. ROM. The correct answer is D. ROM. ROM was created as a read type of memory. ROM was created as a read-only type of memory. Storing your BIOS on the ROM of your PC ensures that your computer can successfully boot up and that no modifications can be made to prevent your system from loading. Question 3. Which of these is not a valid reason to install a new expansion card in your PC? A. To connect an extra monitor, B. To increase the number of network interfaces, C. To add a VGA connection, D. To boost CPU performance. The correct answer is D. To boost CPU performance. Expansion cards are primarily installed to add additional capabilities to your computer, such as adding another connector type for a second monitor or adding another network connection. Question 4. Which type of RAID array provides zero redundancy? A. RAID 1, B. RAID 0, C. RAID 5, D. RAID 10. The correct answer is B. RAID 0. RAID 0 provides stripping of data across multiple drives, but does not mirror data onto any of the drives, providing zero redundancy. Question 5. What is the commonly used name for updating the contents of the BIOS? A. Overclocking, B. PXE boot, C. Flashing, D. Clocking. The correct answer is C. Flashing. It is commonly called flashing the BIOS when you replace, repair, modify, or update its contents. Question 6. Which of the following is not a standard rotational speed found on a hard drive? A. 5200, B. 5400, C. 7000. A. 5200, B. 5400, C. 7200, D. 10,000. The correct answer is A. 5200. Standard disk drives move at a rotational speed of 5,400, 7,200, or 10,000 revolutions per minute, RPM. Question 7. What is the purpose of a heatsink on a motherboard? A. To provide a centralized location for all of the hot components on the motherboard. B. To provide a protective covering for hot components on the motherboard. C. To protect you from touching hot parts on the motherboard. D. To pull the heat away from a very hot device to dissipate the heat. The correct answer is D. To pull the heat away from a very hot device to dissipate the heat. Heat sinks are designed to sit on top of a very hot component, such as a CPU, and draw the heat away toward its fins. Cool air is then blown past these fins, allowing the heat to be absorbed into the airflow. Question 8. Who are the two biggest x86 processor manufacturers in existence? A. Intel and Apple, B. AMD and IBM, C. Intel and AMD, D. AMD and Sun. The correct answer is C. Intel and AMD. In the personal computing x86 32-bit space, Intel and AMD are the largest manufacturers in the world. Question 9. Which of the following is not a USB connector type? A. S, B. C, C. B, D. Micro. The correct answer is A. S. USB has only 5 valid connector types: Type A, Type B, Type-C, Mini, and Micro USB. Question 10. In the United States, what is the standard voltage for alternating current? A. 50 volt to 60 A. 50 volt to 60 volt. B. 110 volt to 120 volt. C. 12 volt to 14 volt. D. 220 volt to 240 volt. The correct answer is B. 110 volt to 120 volt. In the U.S., it is standard to use 110 volt to 120 volt of alternating current. Europe's standard is to use 220 volt to 240 volt. In the U.S., 220 volt to 240 volt is sometimes used for large appliances, but this is not the standard in the U.S. Question 11. A manufacturing company has decided to build a computer game room to use for employees on break at work. They have already purchased an upgraded sound card, high-level cooling system, and high-end video card. What else should be recommended that they purchase? A. Multi-core processor. B. HDMI ports. C. Dual monitors. D. Wireless router. The correct answer is A. Multi-core processor. Knowing the items that they have already purchased, all that is needed is a multi-core processor. Gaming setups typically have demanding CPU requirements. Having multiple cores will increase the efficiency of the setup. Question 12. You've just finished setting up your home server and notice that you are unable to access a spreadsheet on your network. Other users are able to access this without issue. Which step did you likely forget when finalizing your home server? A. Configuring the gigabit NIC adapter. B. Installing a spreadsheet program. C. Upgrading the hard drive. D. Adjusting the file permissions. The correct answer is D. Adjusting the file permissions. If other users are able to access the spreadsheet or file, then it is likely an issue with the permissions. Be sure to verify that file sharing is enabled and that correct permissions are set up when completing your own home server. Here we should use process of elimination to arrive at the correct answer, which is a common test-taking strategy. Note: this question is about the permissions set on the file sharing, not about file sharing itself being inactive. Be sure you note that the question directly tells you it is working for some users, but not all. Question 13. On an LCD display, how many times per minute does the number of pixels change? A. 144. B. It doesn't change. C. 60. D. 120. The correct answer is B. It doesn't change. The number of pixels on a display does not change once it is set. The display itself can change several times a second, but this is known as a refresh rate and does not have any bearing on the number of pixels. Question 14. You've just purchased a brand new monitor for your PC and plan to set up dual monitors for increased efficiency. However, the new monitor only accepts DVI connections and your PC only has a free HDMI port. What type of adapter would you purchase to be able to use the new monitor? A. DVI to VGA. B. HDMI to DVI. C. USB-A to USB-B. D. No change needed. The correct answer is B. HDMI to DVI. In order to connect a monitor with a different connector type than the one on your PC or video card, then an adapter must be used. In this case, HDMI to DVI is appropriate, as these are the two on the physical devices. Question 15. If you are working in an environment with many different servers, what would be the most beneficial device to access all of these for ease of administration? A. Wireless router. B. Smart TV. C. KVM switch. D. MIDI. The correct answer is C. KVM switch. KVM stands for keyboard, video, and mouse, and allows multiple computers to connect to one central device for ease of administration. Note: be sure you see the logical connection between administering servers and the use of a KVM, which is pretty common in all IT environments. Once that logical connection is made, the answer choice should stick out. Question 16. A user at your company has just installed a new set of USB speakers and submitted a ticket to you complaining that he cannot hear sound out of any of them. You log into his PC and notice that he is running a 32-bit version of Windows. What could be the issue? A. He installed the wrong version of the driver. B. The operating system files are corrupted. C. The host firewall needs to be enabled. D. The VGA port is defective. The correct answer is A. He installed the wrong version of the driver. Devices can be very particular about which drivers they need to function correctly. Always check the manufacturer's website and use the suggested driver for the appropriate bit type and operating system type. For example, 64-bit Windows 10 driver. Note, the key here is that the word bit in the question should indicate a possible compatibility issue. Also, even if the peripheral is just plug-in, drivers are installed in the background even if you refer to it as a plug-and-play. Lastly, while a typical 3.5mm speaker jack may not require drivers, example earpods, nearly all USB speakers, or most USB devices for that matter, will indeed require drivers. Question 17. A retail location that your company manages has been complaining about the cost of constantly having to resupply materials for their receipt printers. They've asked you to develop a solution where the cost of ink or toner are reduced, or better yet, eliminated completely. What type of solution would you suggest to your boss? A. Inkjet printer. B. Thermal printer. C. Laser printer. D. Wireless printer. The correct answer is B. Thermal printer. Thermal printers work by applying heat direct to a special kind of chemical paper. There is no need for ink or toner, eliminating these costs completely. They are very popular at small retail locations, like gas stations. Question 18. After clearing a paper jam out of your inkjet printer, you decide to do a full maintenance on the unit. What other maintenance could be done to the printer? A. Replace paper, replace printhead, and apply maintenance kit. B. Clean heads, perform calibration, and replace cartridges. C. Remove debris, replace toner, and replace paper. D. Replace ribbon, clean heating element, and replace toner. The correct answer is B. Clean heads, perform calibration, and replace cartridges. When your ink begins to run low, it's a good idea to replace the cartridges. After this is done, the printer may clean the heads and perform calibration automatically. The heads are subject to clogs often and may cause stickiness if not cleaned regularly. Calibration makes sure that the heads align properly with the paper and that colors don't overlap. The two answer choices that include replace toner would be inappropriate for an inkjet machine. Replacing paper can be done by any equipment user, so it does not require specific knowledge and would not be considered a part of maintenance. Question 19. What voltages are supplied to the motherboard on a 24-pin ATX connector? A. Plus 12 volt DC, minus 12 volt DC, plus 5 volt DC, and minus 3.3 volt DC. B. Plus 12 volt DC, minus 12 volt DC, plus 5 volt DC, and plus 3.3 DC. C. Plus 12 volt AC, minus 12 volt AC, and plus 5 volt DC. D. 120 volt AC. The correct answer is B. Plus 12 volt DC, minus 12 volt DC, plus 5 volt DC, and plus 3.3 volt DC. The 24-pin ATX connector has a standard printout that specifies pin for plus 12 volt DC, minus 12 volt DC, plus 5 volt DC, and plus 3.3 volt DC. Note, be very careful with the positive and negative signs in this type of answer. There is only one sign difference between two of these answers, and only one is correct. Question 20. A customer needs to buy a virtualization server to use as a virtual machine host. She has asked you to provide the hardware configuration. To ensure that it meets the performance needs, which two components should you maximize? A. CPU cores and RAM. B. GPU and display. C. RAM and GPU. D. CPU cores and GPU. The correct answer is A. CPU cores and RAM. The goal of a virtualization host is to run as many virtual machines, VMs, as possible. These VMs that it runs are known as guests. Each VM is allocated CPU cores and RAM, so you need to maximize these components in the server acting as the host for performance.
Hope you enjoyed this video. If you still need more practice, check out these videos. And if you don't mind subscribing, that will help our channel out a lot. Thank you so much.